All right, welcome back to the Federal Fridays, episode 2, with my good friends Jack Riley and Joe Cronin. Say something. Just don't shake your head. This is an actual
Hello.
audio thing.
How you doing?
Glad to be back.
Glad to be back for sure.
All right, and then we have a special guest today, and we're just going to call Joe by his first name. He's still he's a law enforcement officer with the city of St. Louis, task force officer. But one of the things we're going to talk about today is border solutions. Last time we covered the all the chaos that's going on at the border, but now Jack and Joe and Joe have solutions.
Bad law firm.
But they're going to go over some solutions, and one of the reasons we have Joe, our guest Joe, on is he was a former Navy SEAL, and he's seen this border stuff from all sides. And the solutions, which we'll talk about, one of the solutions is using our Tier 1 assets, which is the special forces of our military. And Joe, being a former Navy SEAL, has done some of those operations in that. So, Joe, when did you start the military? And what branch? Obviously, you were in the Navy.
Yeah, I was in the Navy.
And when did you start?
I joined in '99, right out of high school.
Okay.
Went through all the training, and I ended up getting assigned to SEAL Team 4, that's kind of like the Latin America team. They call it the Southcom team at the time. So we specialized in South America, and that's where we did our deployments before 9/11.
How long does it take to become a Navy SEAL?
From the time you start, the actual BUDS is the initial training that you go through. It's basic underwater demolition SEAL training. That's at least 6 months. There's some pre-training before that, so by the time you're done, it's maybe about anywhere from 7 to 8 months. And
If
then
you make it.
if you make it, once you graduate from BUDS, there's some kind of advanced training you have to go through. When I was in, you had to go to airborne school. So when you get to your team, you're on probation for, I think, about 6 months. So kind of by the time you get through everything, it's almost 2 years before you actually get to pin. When I was in, it was about 2 years before you get to pin the trident
Yeah, Joe,
on
that's
your
what I was going to
chest.
ask. So when you complete BUDS, you don't get your trident
No.
at the end of BUDS.
No, you got another 3 months of advanced training.
Wow.
You got to go through. When I was in, it was Army Airborne School. Now they have their own in-house parachute training.
Okay.
And then when you got to the team, you were on probation for, I think it was 6 months before you finally got your trident. Now, from what I understand, they get their tridents after that advanced training.
Okay.
And
So-
Joe, just so everybody knows, when you talk about team,
Mm-hmm.
how big are these teams?
Your standard unit for a SEAL team to operate is about 15 guys, and that's a SEAL platoon. More and more, kind of with the war on terror, we tended to work in bigger groups. So you might work with your sister platoon. That's like a 30 person element. And I think there are 6 platoons per team.
Okay, that's
So
what I-
maybe,
So it's
do the
not,
math.
in the scale of the military, it's a very, very small
Yeah,
percentage.
we are historically a small mission unit.
Yes.
Yep.
And when did you get out of there and become a policeman?
Got out in '06, kind of floundered around for a little bit, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Like I said, my dad was a city police officer
Yes.
for almost 30 years.
I know him well.
And I just kind of decided I wanted to try out law enforcement. So I applied, got hired by the city in '08, and I've been here ever since.
You like it?
I love it.
That's good. And like we said, Joe's a current task force officer with one of the 3-letter agencies, and we'll leave that alone. But during that, before you became there, you were a sniper on the SWAT team, correct?
Yep, I was on our SWAT team for about 8 years. And then one of the things I did on the SWAT team was sniper.
Yep.
And
So it gives you a lot of background in what we're going to talk about. And so we'll get
Right.
with Joe. And Joe, talk a little bit about the border solutions. And
Well, before I get into any of that, which I think I have to make a couple things perfectly clear. So we got a pretty good, Joe, I don't mean to call you a badass, but we got a badass guy sitting right next to me. He's got
Thank
all
you.
these great things going on. But what does he have that we're not talking about? He has a love and desire
Oh,
for
stop.
rocks.
I do.
Loves geology. We talk about it a lot. We worked together for about 2
Waiter,
or 3 years.
check, please.
And I've got a fellow guy here, so I've heard a lot of guff about me and that shit. Well, now I got a SEAL Team 4 guy next to me, so bring it. We're gonna look at
rocks,
some rocks.
Yeah,
we-
let's
we
talk
have
about
the,
rocks.
St.
There goes
Francis
there goes
Mountains
the
in our
entire
backyard.
audience.
There you go.
Yeah.
We
Wake
do.
up,
Yeah,
wake up.
the entire audience clicks off as we discuss the rocks.
Believe it or not, I've had a lot of people ask me about some of that stuff.
Yeah,
but
okay. I'll go with
so to
Matt.
go forward to see what we're going to talk about a little bit today. There's one thing I want to talk about for a quick second. I talked to the producer and made sure it was good with that. So we're usually on the lens of first responders, and we're the ones in looking in instead of the ones out looking in, or the ones out looking out, or whatever you want to say. But recently at my house, I had an emergency with my daughter. There's some things that are going on, and I got to give a great shout out. I called 911, had to bring her back, and the lady on the 911 operator was absolutely amazing. She kept the situation calm. I asked for an ambulance and EMS to come, and they were absolutely amazing. It's St. Charles County EMS, St. Charles County 911 Center. I just want to say you guys are the bomb, and for the first time in my life, I was the one on the inside looking for help from you, and I just can't say enough good things about it. And I think the podcast here that we have tries to bring out the good things in life and the good things for what we all did and do, and this is something that can't go unnoticed. So thank you, and want to go there for a brief second. All right, before I
And
get
your daughter's doing okay right now?
She's doing all right. We're
that's
gonna
good
get through this just like everybody else does with troubles, but we're gonna get through it. So I wanted to say thank you to St. Charles County and go from there. So last time we talked about the border, and we talked about the chaos at the border. We talked about the cartels. We talked about the money. We talked about the trade with Mexico, and we kind of unleashed a little bit about Jack's and I's background about what we could do, or what we thought we could do to make things a little bit better. So some of the things we're going to talk about today is 3 of the solutions we came up with. One is a very kinetic solution, and that's why Joe's here. And the other
Explain
2,
what kinetic is.
kinetic means striking, militaristic, designated terrorist organization type stuff. If you ever watch SEAL Team, which I'm not a big promoter of any TV shows, police shows, or military shows, but SEAL Team, this last couple episodes were about China, fentanyl, and the new role of SEAL teams in this, as the world is in chaos anyway, but as they get deployed to these foreign entities and do some of the things we're going to talk about today. So it's very fitting. So if you want to see it in action, it's on the TV. SEAL Team, I believe is it SEAL Team 6 or just SEAL Team? Whatever it is, it's on the Paramount Network. But Joe's going to tell us real time what this is like. But one of the things we brought up is, or the 3 things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about how do we make it better to get into the country. We can't just let everybody in, right? So how do we make it a little bit better? And that'll be short because that's kind of boring and it's political what's going on. And the second thing we're going to talk about is what it means if we designate the cartels, not only in Mexico, everywhere else, foreign terrorist organizations. What happens when they get designated in
Let me
that
ask you
realm?
this real quick, Joe. Is that, or I'll ask Jack this, is designating them or designating cartels terrorist group, is that the best solution?
That in connection with some current way that we're operating in foreign countries, I would say yes. But let's be careful about if we were to move towards this, and I testified in front of Congress, met with the vice president on this. This is an issue that's very, very scrutinized, and it's a difficult thing, and that's why, Tommy, you guys are great doing what you're doing, because it's a hard thing to articulate to the American people. And when we say cartels, we say 1 or 2. We're not suggesting, as we did very similar operations in Colombia, if you recall, with the Medellin and Cali cartel. So the entities south of the border, there are primarily 3 major threats that have been sustained for years. Those would be the ones that I did and would and hope that the American people, that their congressmen know, need to be designated. Because it changes, and Joe will tell you, it'll change our response internationally, militarily, and also it will provide financial incentives for us to go after people connected to them who have, to this point, just been making money off everybody's misery.
Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit more specifically, and Jack can tell some really good stories about connecting that to the domestic cartels in the United States, which is a program he started. And I think that was a good kicker offer that we could have brought to Congress in 2015 and 16 when he first introduced it, and then made the connection. So you're not only getting ideas, but you're getting ideas that were tested and tried, and you're also getting two guys that tried to bring this to the attention of the people in Washington so that we go further. And then we're going to cap it off with what Joe has done in the past, and then what he could do. But we're also going to bring some real-time stuff into that because of the group in DEA called SynTAC, which was the predecessor to what we're going to try and do today.
And what does SynTAC stand for?
It stands for the Counter Narco-Terrorism Operations Center. So it was founded to do the exact same thing that we're talking about today, but they primarily were Hezbollah, Hamas.
Let me ask a quick question with you, Jack. So you've been trying to get these, or attempting to get these cartels designated a terrorist group. What's the response? Why aren't they doing it?
Well, the response that I got from congressmen and senators when I was the day-to-day guy at DEA was that Mexico is a sovereign country, and for us to take military action against the sovereign countries can be considered an act of war. But the real, and we've talked about this, Tom, the real issue here is the literally billions of dollars of legitimate commerce that goes across that border and that we deal with Mexico, not just the United States, but around the world. So it will have, if it's done improperly, it could have an effect on the international economy, and certainly would have ramifications if it's not done properly. I think the one thing, and I always hated using this, but in this situation I think it's important, the one of government approach is what we should do. And that's why it's so important that we get them designated, because we can bring in Joe and his guys who can bring along with them all the expertise, the training, and certainly the military ability to go and cut the head of the snake off, which to date has pretty much been left to DEA and the FBI and some other agencies. It's very difficult to operate in a corrupt society as Mexico, Central and South America.
Jack, do you think that the United States would ever do that without the cooperation and permission of Mexico? Do you think they'd ever go in unilaterally?
I think we would, and we have.
Okay.
And I can tell you, I authorized a couple of things that normally we would have gone through the ambassador and made sure that proper notifications were made, and we chose not to. And
Okay.
Congress, we did tell Congress what we were doing, and they concurred, and the Department of Justice concurred. But you've got to look at our success stories. If you look at what occurred in Colombia during the height of what everybody knows to be Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel, that was a very effective campaign that literally turned that country around. It is now one of the strongest legitimate economies in all of Central and South America. It still has its issues because of where cocoa in particular and poppies are grown, but we were able to use not only DEA, but we had Joe's people in there. We also had the Brits with us. So it was a really concerted effort, and I think the first step to that is to get it designated, get these cartels, several of the cartels designated.
So we're gonna talk about those subjects today, but the boring one, because the other two are pretty exciting, but the boring one is about
Throw rocks at them?
we could do that. You could do that. The boring one is I'm going to put some things into perspective. So we got a couple different ways, and we've committed to try to stay out of politics. We don't want to be a conservative or democratic view. We want to try to give you views from real people that have seen this in certain ways, but also provide real solutions and try to stay away from politics. So I'll try to, but there's some things that may come out, and I apologize. But number one, at the end of our podcast last time, we said, you've got to close the border. You just can't have all these people coming to the southern border. We didn't talk about the northern border, but it's the same. How do you shut it off, and how do you make it better so that we can have immigrants come in because they're the backbone of this country? Well, let me explain a little bit about how much this cost federal, state, and local governments in 2023. 2023 alone. Open border, letting everybody in, getting some to an app, getting some here, the gotaways we talked about, all that stuff cost roughly $150 billion with a B dollars to the American taxpayer. For everybody that pays tax per capita in the United States, that's about $8,000. That's a huge number. Now, let me add a little bit more in perspective. The border wall was anticipated to cost about $12 billion. Eventually, the final numbers, about $22 billion. That's a border over 1,100 miles on our southern border, a wall. That's insane. DEA's annual budget, the Drug Enforcement Administration, about 4,500 agents and about another 4,000 support personnel, boats, airplanes, cars, weapons, academies, everything you can think of. The annual budget's about $2.6 billion in 2023.
The one thing we need to clarify, those are direct appropriations. That's not supplemental. For instance, we get quite a bit of money from the State Department, from OCDF, for instance, but these are direct. And I think this is really important because it holds true with the FBI, ATF.
Can you explain what
the
direct,
marshals.
direct is?
Directly is when it's directly appropriated by Congress or the body that controls your budget. Now, here's the kicker, and they don't talk about this. When I was there, we were dealing with about $3 billion a year. But a lot of that money was earmarked, and we couldn't use it for where we needed it. So they can say your ceiling of special agents and the modules that include agents, cars, all that, analysts, all the stuff that goes with the agents, you can have 7,000 agents. We're going to authorize that. But they only give us money for 4,700. So that is a big difference, and I think that's something American people don't realize. So direct appropriation shows exactly what it is that we have to maintain and operate. And when you're in 64 countries with 80-some offices around the world, at least 200 domestic offices, you got to pay rent, you got to pay air conditioning, you got to, all of those things come out of the direct, in addition to the salaries. So it's a misleading number. It seems like a tremendous amount, but there are so many strings tied to the way it can be spent that I think it is misleading.
Okay. So where does that money go? What do they do with the $150 billion? Well, the $150 billion, and that's not a direct appropriation, right? So that's discretionary spending or spending that's not earmarked or spending that just goes right to the national debt, which last time I checked was $34 trillion. Is that correct? 34-ish trillion. Yeah. You can fact check me on that. So we don't even have it earmarked for anything. We don't take it from anything. We borrow the money to make this work. So that's for education, medical care, enforcement of the border, and other welfare programs. And when you have all these people come in, you have to take care of them, right? They can't speak English, or they can speak English, or they have to have some sort of job training. They have to have some sort of housing. They have to eat. They have to have phones. It's a tremendous, tremendous cost. In the politics of it, one of the greatest stories I ever heard was an alderman in Chicago who was fed up with the immigrants coming to his city based on airlines. They would just drop them off in Chicago or take the bus to Chicago, and they could not find the money to take care of these people. And one of the newscasters asked him, well, you're a sanctuary city and you voted for that. You voted to become a sanctuary city. And the alderman said, well, we just did that because we didn't like Donald J. Trump. Now, whether you like Donald J. Trump or not, but if you're a politician and you take a vote like that and the chickens come back to roost, as they say, look at what that's doing to these cities. Now, Mayor Adams is the same way. He's done the same thing. And he's
got a whole different problem now.
He's been very vocal about trying to make political arguments and then having things go a different way. But I think the numbers are out of control. So one of the things we have to do is we have to stop it. But we also want to be a country of immigrants. There's not a person at this table that doesn't believe that all our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, some of our fathers are all from foreign countries, and they've done great things in this country. And we want to continue that. And the way we have to continue that is we have to streamline the process. And it can't take 4 or 5 years to see a judge. It can't take 4 or 5 years to get a visa. It can't take 4 or 5 years to be allowed to come in here and work, to get a work permit. So some of the solutions that we believe in is, what if we took some of this $150 billion, very simply just close the border, but then put some of that money towards the resources to streamline the process, especially with students and high-value people that we want to come here, engineers, skilled labor, student visas, families, anything we can bring in that can bring merit to our country and also help us. We want the immigrants in here. So that's phase one. I won't get into a lot of the little nuances of it, but I think some of the things that we could do to make that a little bit better is we have to modernize the entire legal process of becoming an immigrant in the United States. We have to eliminate any redundant systems. Jack, myself, Joe, and Tommy all worked for the government. Everything is redundant. Every single solitary thing is ridiculous, and you can't believe that it takes X amount of hours to do something when you have to fill out the same form 20 different ways. Can you imagine what it's like in the immigration system? It's got to be nuts. We have to eliminate fraud. We have to increase judges. We have to revamp all the forms, the immigration forms. They're almost 25 years old. They have not been redone in 25 years.
And you mentioned to increase the judges. I think that's a very good solution, is because the problem that takes so long is because one of the things is they can never get into court.
Yeah.
Never.
The whole immigration court and judge situation has been miserable for 20 years.
And that's an immediate way to
But Tommy,
to
one
do
of
this.
the reasons I previously mentioned direct appropriations, and this is where the jerk off politicians get their fingers in how we do this, because they'll direct appropriate money for those particular services to be provided, for instance, and they'll approve that, yes, we can hire 50,000 more judges, but they're not going to provide the money to do it. So the infrastructure itself is crumbling, much like our highway systems, because nobody's paid attention to it for a while. But this is definitely, and I totally agree with what Joe's saying, this is a solvable problem.
I think
Somebody's
so.
just going to have to write a check. And I think every American, if they understand this, and just have a cursory understanding and be able to articulate this to their policymakers, it's a home run. It would change immediately. And for one, I don't understand why our politicians want to maintain control of these things that are really hurting the nation. So it's up to people to raise their voice.
And I think it's good for our country.
And that doesn't include, and again, there's a lot of politics that go into designating a terrorist group. Hiring more judges and getting the process streamlined does not have to go through that political, back and forth. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah.
But nobody in the political theater right now is talking about making the system better. Nobody. They're not talking about bringing in more judges. They're not talking about doing startup visas from foreign countries. They're not talking about revamping the paperwork.
Well, if you could trace this back, and I think this is an important, 9/11 changed a lot of things. It consolidated agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, which, in my opinion, if you were to do an analysis of how they've performed since they were consolidated, they'd all flunk. It's over 150,000 employees strong, and I had a hard time keeping track of 9,000. So I don't understand how that benefited. On the surface, it looked like we were more together, but quite frankly, the Border Patrol, the old Customs Department, which now doesn't exist, all of these things were specific to controlling immigration and what came into this country, and now they're gone.
They are. So hopefully whoever gets in takes this on and takes it on the right way. And get in, I mean the president. Hopefully they get in and they realize that this is a huge possibility for us to stay number one in the world, but also to bring in foreign partners and become better at humanitarian, not only every little issue that we can work out throughout the world, but what we got to do here as well. So
I want to hear about how we're going to classify this as a terrorist group.
All right.
And then we're going to get
I'm talking about it
tier
now.
one assets involved, and Joe and his people are going to come in.
I told you that it was the
start
most
kicking some ass. That's what I want to hear about.
Listen, I told you it was the most boring part, but it
Well,
is,
it's not
Let's
as
get
boring
into
as you're
some-
talking about
Let's
rocks.
get into some.
but I think it's
SEAL
it's
Team
important.
4 operations.
I think it's important to try to come up with a solution. So Tommy wants us to get in the meat and bolts, or meats and potatoes, or nuts and bolts, or whatever that is. So we're going to try and do that. I had a great story to tell about Joe that Joe told me
Does it
about
include
2 or
rocks?
3 months ago, but they will not. They said, you got to get moving. So maybe next time I'll tell you this really cool story about something that happened to Joe, and I relate that to some people I work with, but not today. All right, so here we go. So we're going to talk about what it is to designate a foreign terrorist organization. What does that mean? So I'm going to give a couple little quick things, and then I'm going to let the two experts talk about it from their different perspectives. So one, believe it or not, they must be foreign. So it must be a foreign terrorist organization. They must engage in some sort of terrorist activity. Believe it or not, destroying the youth of America is a terrorist activity. They must threaten the security of the United States, its people, itself. I think we can pretty much say that that's good. The process, what's the process? The process is old, which is really neat. Even goes back to Thomas Jefferson days, talking about Libya and some of the pirates back in the day. So some of this stuff goes all the way back there. And it was all so that they could appropriate money and appropriate new rules to do things. So the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Treasury meet with the Attorney General, and they come up with a proposal, and they submit it to a secret branch of Congress. And when Congress looks at it, they decide whether they're going to vote for it or they don't. And if they do, there's usually some sort of a cooling off period or 6 or 7 months where they can figure out if they did the right thing. Now, once you're on it, doesn't mean you can't get off of it, which we have the Hamas organization, which used to be a designated terrorist organization and then was removed as a designated terrorist organization. And I'm not so sure what
that
they're
was a
thinking
good
about
idea.
now, but I think we pretty much know that they're a terrorist organization.
Are they currently a terrorist organization or not?
They are not,
Yeah.
according
And when
to the
did
United
that get
States.
lifted?
It was in the last 3 years. So they discussed some of that stuff when they were trying to do the Iran deal. So it's all over the news today, right? So we all know that Iran is the head of the octopus.
Sounds like it's working out good.
Iran is the head of the octopus, and they have 8 or 9 legs, and they have different proxies. And one of the proxies is Hamas, another is Hezbollah, another are the Houthis that do their bidding or proxy-type wars, as you hear on the news today. So that's kind of where that comes from. So to stay focused, I think what's really important and what these guys are going to hit home is once you are designated, it brings a whole bunch of new laws and opens up doors associated with positions that Joe had and others to do some interesting things to you if you continue or you attempt to harm our citizens or the United States. But one of the biggest, and Jack and I talked about this, and we'll talk a little bit about Syntac to add flavor to it as well, because we were both involved in that on the government war on terror against Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, and how that worked out. If you, and I'm going to swear, so I apologize, if you fuck with them in any way or provide any material support to them in any way financially, if you give them refuge in your home, if you buy drugs from them, you can now be considered a part of that organization, which is immense. And if you think about that, and Jack's going to talk about how he tried to do this domestic terrorist organization and then couple it to foreign terrorist organizations if we could do it, and how that would just decimate street gangs, drug dealers, mini cartels in the United States. And then Joe's going to talk about some of the kinetic things that he could do. So those are some of the big ones. I know, Jack, you had a couple little things about Congress you kind of wanted to say. So if you would add that.
I think the best way to frame it for our listeners is anyone that facilitates a foreign terrorist organization or foreign group that means harm to the U.S. in a bunch of different ways. So if, as Joe said, if you house them, if you sell computers to them, if you handle their bank accounts, if you send them clothes, weapons, automobiles, even if you don't really know the specifics of who you're sending it to, we can come out and kick your ass.
And that includes selling drugs at a street level.
Absolutely. And
So that's a whole new charge. You know, VMCSL when it
it's a
takes on a
pretty-
terrorism task or a terrorism aspect to it, and
pretty
one
bold.
guy goes to jail for a long period of time for a little amount of dope because it was tied to terrorism.
Pretty bold concept.
That would send a message really quick about dealing dope on the streets too.
Material support prosecutions.
Yep. And then
So Joe, let's unbuckle the holster here.
Okay.
Here's the situation as I saw it and as I see it today. Let's just talk about DEA and our ability to develop intel from a variety of different sources, Syntac being one. So we identify Chapo Guzman and Sinaloa cartel. We get them designated as a foreign terrorist organization, and we become operational. We become operational with different laws we can use, additional funding, and we also give you guys a call. And we say, here's the leadership, here's what we know about them, here's the way they communicate, here's their phone numbers, sat phones, here's what we believe they're driving, here are the people that are facilitating their escape from law enforcement. Go get them. Tell us what you have done and what you believe we could do south of the border to stop this.
So I think, first of all, anything that specifically the SEAL teams, so Naval Special Warfare is the SEAL teams,
Right.
okay? We're not going to do anything by ourselves. Everything we do it's going to be purple, right? Joint operations. So it's probably going to be a joint effort. Right off the bat, if we get the authority to do operations down there, I think the initial thing that you're going to see is just a massive, what they call ISR campaign. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So right off the bat, we're going to take the information that you guys give us, and we're probably going to work directly with you down there. And the first thing that's going to have is a big wave. The Air Force is probably going to release like a huge ISR campaign. And so that means they're going to use all their technological platforms, Predator drones, which are already kind of down there.
Right.
'Cause
We use them.
Yep. Homeland Security, Immigration, Customs, and
I got a
Border Patrol.
funny story to tell you about the drones thing. We were not allowed to use them, but
Right.
through somebody in the State Department, I got $27,000 to buy a drone. This is when we were trying to locate Chapo. And we sent it down there, and our guys, being as technologically advanced as they flew it into the back of Chapo's truck. So that was the end of our drone program.
What's up?
So
Oops. We're not looking at you, Chapo. That's just a drone.
we're not going to go down there blind. We probably already have the groups that we're going to try to link up with. The relationships are probably there already.
Right.
I think which groups we end up linking up with down there is going to greatly depend on how much cooperation we get from the Mexican government, and I think you'd probably say one of the more trusted groups down there are
Marines.
elements of the Mexican Marines.
No question.
So now if the Mexican government is kind of pushing back against this, will they let us work with them? I mean, that's a question. But let's say that we can. I can guarantee we're going to be kind of hooking up with our trusted counterparts down there. While this ISR campaign is going on, we're probably going to start developing target lists,
There
what
we
they
go.
call high-value targets, HVTs.
Joe, is there a time frame on the ISR campaign? Is it usually in your past experiences that we know that you've been deployed to Colombia and some other places in South America. Is it typically something that you have a beginning and an end? It's 2 months, it's 1 month, or
No,
is it as it goes and
Days.
that's it?
Yeah, the first
it's
couple
quick.
of days it would, the cool thing about, well, not the cool thing, but the advantageous thing about it being Mexico is that's our backyard. We don't have to fly 8,000 miles across the world to get there. You know, you can walk off of probably some army bases and walk on foot into Mexico.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
that's going to be helpful to us. Special Operations has been working in Latin America for decades and generations. So we have a lot of institutional knowledge on how to operate down there. So yeah, like I said, you probably see target lists getting created. And the idea with that is that you want the leadership to feel like there's no safe place to hide. And I know there's a lot of criticism about cutting the head off the snake, another one grows back up. Well, the thing about that is you got to keep going. You know, cut the head off the snake, another one pops up, you cut the head off that snake, and you keep going. And eventually you're going to deplete.
Nobody wants to be the snake anymore.
No.
Right.
Destroys enemy morale. Nobody wants to step up and take charge. If they see everybody that steps up ends up getting whacked. you're not going to want to take charge.
It also does one of the things that I love, and we use this with DEA in a couple countries. It provides misinformation.
Yeah.
So they're terrified. And obviously, in the last 15 years, nobody wants to come up against a Navy SEAL.
No.
Nobody.
Can you imagine the chaos?
So I can see Chapo, all 5 feet, 2 of them, swearing his ass off to his security people, and they finally realize, "Oh, SEAL team, what's coming down here? I'm leaving."
Right.
And that's the other strength to this. But that doesn't stop down in Mexico. That sends shockwaves to their surrogates operating here domestically. And
Right.
Joe and I will talk about how we were going to take advantage of that. But so that is great. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's.
I want to just ask an additional question. When you were operating as a SEAL team, you're not in uniform, are you? Or are you in uniform?
It all depends on, it's kind of like the question of a permissive and non-permissive environment, all right? So permissive environment could be the Mexican government says, come on in, use our military bases.
I highly doubt that'll happen.
Right. So it's probably going to be some combination of a non-permissive to semi-permissive environment that we're operating in. We do work clandestine. So a lot of the missions that we've done were no insignia, no markings, kind of either
Blend in and do your thing?
Right, either clandestine or covert. There might be situations where you're sterilizing yourself of, identification cards, no dog tags, things like that.
So in a non-permissive environment where you don't, are you guys like living in like houses and?
It's going to be the hard thing. You'll have to, you need a place to operate out of. So we're still going to have to find some friendly group down there that we work with, whether it's, I know down kind of on the southern border of Mexico, when you start getting to that close to Guatemala and Honduras, there's a lot of like indigenous populations down there that hate the cartels.
Yes.
Because the cartels, a lot of people don't know this either, this new cartel, the CJNG, the Cartel Jalisco New Generation, they conscript migrants from other Central American countries and force them at threat of death to work for them. Those could be candidates for groups that we would hook up with and get them on our side.
For intelligence gathering and high value,
safe
and
houses,
to create
places
high value
to,
targets.
Yep, places to operate out of. You don't really need a safe house when you can be in El Paso.
That's right.
And in 2 hours you can be, way deep down into Mexican territory.
The Mexican government authorizes so many DEA agents to operate, and
Right.
that number's classified. But I will say,
How many is it again?
I was going to ask too.
it's more than that. It's more than that are in St. Louis. I'll say that. But one of the other plans that we actually put on the drawing board was to bring you guys in as DEA agents.
Yeah. Sign me up.
If we felt that the Mexican government wasn't going to allow us,
Right.
you guys.
Sure.
So that's on the table too, and people need to know.
Right.
And again, that sends the message: you don't know who the hell you're dealing with.
Right.
So I love that part.
pretty
Joe,
cool.
when you collect the intelligence, when you do your intelligence, you come up with high value targets. I imagine some of those targets are ports and ships and logistics and all that type of stuff. How much authority do you have to act on that? Is it go ahead and you get your orders when you go, or you have to confirm what you have to do before you do it?
I think that it will be one thing that we do have in special operations, that we have our own in-house intelligence collecting capability. So it'll be just a combination.
Okay.
We're probably going to be getting a lot of our intel from you guys,
Yeah.
DEA, other 3-letter agencies. But once we kind of start getting a foothold down there, we're going to start collecting our own intelligence.
I love it.
We're going to start recruiting our own sources.
I love it.
And bringing them in. I think that's another great thing about having our people down there.
Yeah.
Is one of the strengths of these cartels is that the power to create fear. Well, there's no safe place for a cooperator right now in Mexico. What we could do as a special operations unit is we can create safety for people who do want to cooperate.
Okay.
Yep.
Whereas we don't have that right now.
And you can
Everybody's afraid of these guys.
also remove someone immediately without going through any of the legal procedures.
What do you
in
mean by the word
Mexico.
remove?
put our hands on, put them in the back of a helicopter, and
I'll just check
see
it.
ya.
There you go. Yeah.
So
Same
is
thing we do
usually-
here, Tom.
Is it usually a wide array of your own discretion to make operations? Let's say
it will be.
We'll keep it for the kids here. But let's say we're going to blow up a port, or we're going to just disable the port. So we know that fentanyl's coming in on these Chinese ships, and we want to make sure that it doesn't
need
hit
that.
the lab.
Right.
You identify it. Your intelligence is solid. You've confirmed it. You've verified it. You're ready to go. Is that something that your mission focus at the beginning is already determined, so you just go do it, or do you have to get authority to do it?
I think it just depends. And so, you know, there's like Title 10 and Title 50 too. So that governs whether this is kind of an intelligence operation or a military operation.
Okay.
I think it all depends on, are we operating under Title 10 authority or Title 50 authority? But it could be that we can see a target, make the decision in-house to attack it, and,
Okay.
and go and do it. It's probably going to be driven by theater commanders. That could be an Army guy, could be a Navy guy. That person would probably be the guy deciding what we do.
So
A general.
I'm going to go back to high-value targets. When you have a high-value target, is the goal, and if you can answer the question, is the goal to arrest them, or is the goal to take them out?
Both.
Or is it both?
Both.
So that's a determined. Again,
Yep.
that determination's made on
Right.
the fly,
And
depending on
also
the circumstances.
Right. The high-value target gets a vote on that too. It depends on,
What he does.
does he want to die?
Okay, I
So
got you.
he can make the call right there on yes, there's going to be a lot of, we're just like the police, we want to get information. You can't really get information from a dead guy, but if it comes down to it,
I got you. Yep.
not a problem. We'll
Plus,
find somebody
you
else.
also bring a bag of money down there with you,
Right.
Which makes a big difference in terms of trying to get people to see it our way. So the rules of engagement, if you were down there, were going to be really decided. It's going to be mission oriented, and it's going to be directed by the commanders.
Sure.
Which I love.
Yeah.
The guys that really know what the hell they're doing.
Right.
Do you? Here's something else. If we were to supply operation information, you guys acted. Do we do an after action review?
That's one great thing that I remember from the special operations world is that everything you do, you hash out what went wrong, what went right. We
I
should
love
do that
it.
in law enforcement. We don't. We don't.
We
have
try
sit-
to- we
don't
try
have
to,
sit-downs.
but-
yeah,
I'll tell you-
I'm talking about like locally in my experience.
Yeah.
We do things, and there's no sit down afterwards where we're critical of each other. Like, hey, this is how we could have done better. This is what we sustain. This is what we want to improve on, and we need to do that here because
exactly
it's
right.
definitely going to happen with the military.
I
Very
was
good
I was
point.
very impressed in that. I've sat in a few of those with some South America stuff with some Navy guys, and they would come to SOD and we would do the after action, after the deployment,
Right.
which is typically about 6 months. If it's not
Yep.
terrorist organization, it's usually about 6 months, and then we would all sit in a room together. What could we do better? What did we do wrong? How do we make this?
You know what I think is important for listeners to understand? Do you see how professional and choreographed this type of operation would be? You are not sending undisciplined, untrained military people to do whatever the hell they want. They're the most respected fighting unit in the world, and they've got combatant commanders overseeing everything they do. In addition to reporting to the policymakers that have approved it. So it's not going to be, me and you and Tommy and John grabbing a couple guns and going across the border and saying, hey, I think that's a cartel guy.
Need beer too.
Yeah, we'd have to
get
steal
some-
our own beer down there.
Some
Good
road
beer.
trip beers.
For every special operator you see on the ground, there's gonna be 20 support people behind
Don't you love it?
them,
Yep.
Wow.
helping.
And that's a very dynamic way to take control of a situation that's been a mess for years. Obviously, it's not going to go on forever, right? So you have to have maximum success in a short amount of time, and then the other agencies have to come in and figure out a way to control it after that.
Right.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't admit going after cartel-related people is going to have a drastic effect on the coyotes and the organizations that smuggle because they're afraid Joe's coming too.
Right.
Right? It would build it would build chaos. And then there's some other things, and we don't have to talk about it today, but also we have to remember that when we go do stuff like that, and this is one of the reasons that we probably don't, is the economies of some of these countries, unfortunately, are based on narco dollars or terror dollars in other
Corruption.
countries. So it would really impact a lot.
But I think one of the things that I found very interesting in what Joe said there is not every, you think of Mexico and you think, well, everybody's in a cartel, you know, just because that's all we hear about Mexico is cartels, cartels, cartels. So everybody must be affiliated with a cartel. But so many of them would enjoy the fact of being safe and not getting family member killed. And I think that's very important what you said, is that not only do you have people that you know are going to might cooperate, but providing that safety to them and saying, hey, you come with us and you're just not going to get hurt. That's just what we do.
I mean, the strategy for the cartels is plomo a plata, so which means, you know, lead or bullets.
Yeah.
If we take their ability to strike fear in the hearts of people to where they just stay quiet and don't cooperate and help, I think that will be huge in getting information.
So one cartel, let's just call it, let's just say the
Sinaloa.
Sinaloa cartel. How many guys, so would they put several teams down there? Do teams do operations together, or do you usually go with members of your own team?
Each platoon would deploy. There probably be a couple of platoons or teams down there at one time. It would be a rotation. There's also like the regular SEAL teams, and then there's the Tier 1 team, which is, Dev Group, or SEAL Team 6, as everybody calls them. They're going to have a specific mission down there. The other SEAL teams are going to be assigned missions down there. We're probably going to also be simultaneously working with the Army and Air Force and
their Tier 1 forces,
Yep.
or their
they'll
special forces?
probably all be down there working together.
Now, have you, in your past, have you worked with all those,
I have.
all the other special forces?
I have, yep. I've actually worked with 7 Group, which is the SEAL Team 4 counterpart. They also specialize in Latin America.
And what force are they from, or what military?
The Army Special Forces.
Okay.
So when you say the word Special Forces,
Trust.
generally that's a specific unit within the Army called Special Forces. When you're trying to use a blanket term for any kind of special operations type unit, like SEALs or Green Berets, usually you'll say like Special Operations. Okay. So Special Forces are an actual unit. That's the Green Berets.
Okay.
And I would say
I was just gonna ask that.
that would be the Army counterpart of the Navy SEALs.
And where does Delta fit into this?
So they're like Team 6. They're the Tier 1, one of the nation's Tier 1 counterterrorism units, and they're probably going to be doing a lot of raids and probably the most sensitive HVT missions and different things like that.
Saddam and stuff like that.
Right.
What I like about this, and Joe, you mentioned this, is we share a 2,000-mile border with them, which means we ain't going away.
No.
Neither are they.
Yeah. Well, they're going to have to figure out how they're going to
Figure
live.
something out, right? That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
And
Try
I
to
think
figure this out.
It's not like we're going to be airlifting guys across the world continuously now. They'll be over in El Paso drinking cold ones, and then Monday morning we're heading back over.
Right.
What fascinates me about not only the kinetic strikes, what we talked about, like what you're talking about right now, but what else fascinates me is the cartels are intertwined in everyday life of Mexico and its citizens, and obviously in ours as well. But yet, they're almost always our number one trading partner. They're one of our best friends economically and commercially in the world. But the cartels still have such a foothold.
Yeah.
I don't understand that part of it.
It's hundreds of years old, Joe. It's a culture unto itself. It's pervasive in not just Mexico, but Central and further south in America. You just brought up a great reason why we have to get Joe involved.
I think so.
Because that's what we're up against.
Right.
So there's got to be a seismic change in the way that we kick their ass. And that's what we got to do. And I hope what we're trying to get across today is this is a controlled, well thought out way of doing it. These guys have been successful in places like Colombia, the Middle East. We're not making this up as we go. It's a home run. And I just hope the dopes in Washington kind of see the value and also the long-term effect it could have on our security.
So, Jack, I know we're going to get into the domestic cartel stuff because that's a great add-on domestically to what Joe's talking about. But what do you see Joe's group goes in there, designated an FTO, Joe's group goes down there, does their magic for 6-8 months. What do we do after that? How do we keep it? What do we do?
Our plan would be to scrape off information that they would develop that we could further use in legal proceedings. And I think the way that we had envisioned doing this when we thought about this a few years ago was we were going to do it regionally because we realized that the cartels in many senses are geographically divided in the territory in which they control. So we would try to break it down regionally and move regionally because that's how we would shock and fear the shit out of them. And that would give us, I think, a lot more cooperators, which would also make their communications far less disciplined. Their alliances would break down, and that would give us an opportunity on the U.S. side of the border to go after the cells that are operating throughout the country, which is a real big benefit. And obviously, those investigations would go to court, go through the system.
Quick question for you. Can you guys operate domestically?
No.
A portion of you or no?
No, for the most part, no. Like we probably would not be able to do.
That's a good
like
question.
direct action raids.
So
in the
your
United
information
States.
would be funneled to locally through whatever communication.
And that's another possible benefit of this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of our domestic investigations we're doing against these guys, they don't exactly stop at the border, but they kind of do because anything we need from down there, we have to rely on the Mexican government. Like if we need, a trap and trace on a Mexican phone number, we'll have to probably go through Mexico. Well, if we have our people down there, we can ask for it and have our people down there getting that information without worrying about compromise or. So I think that some of the information we can get by having our people down there will help our investigations here in St. Louis.
I think it's a two-way highway there,
that's the
and then we can say up there
Right.
where you would get that information
Yeah, that's
going back and forth in the communication.
That's the whole point. Because their Achilles heel has always been communication. Command and control
Without a
hides in
doubt.
Mexico. They're dealing with people in St. Louis. They got to talk to them.
Right.
And when they talk to them, if we can connect it, and we do, coming out of Mexico, going to a U.S.-based phone number or cell site, we can really do some damage.
And kind of followed up, you talked about the intelligence. The great thing about all the intelligence that you would capture when you were down there, you would obviously filter that to organizations like Jack and I worked in SOD and Centoc and some other places. And we would process that and be able to disseminate that to all the investigations domestically. It would be a huge
Yeah.
that alone would
treasure
be
trove
amazing.
of unbelievable data.
Right.
Because
And it would be real time.
it would be immediate.
Go to the hotel room 450 on that fourth floor
Right.
and knock the door down because there's $1 billion in there,
Right.
and that could happen.
I think it would be a neat alliance between the military and the local police, and,
Me too.
and I think that would be very, very fun to be involved in if it did go that route.
One great thing about special operations units down there, or the military in general, would be the speed that you can turn things around.
Right.
I think in law enforcement, we're used to like, oh, next week I'm going to get the the warrant on that phone, and then the week after that we're going to start acting on it. I think it'll be get the information now, disseminate it, and people are acting on it right away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
Faster than
again,
we're
and that's
used to.
fun.
And that
I
would be
mean,
great.
And that was really the concept behind the domestic cartel program.
Yeah.
Was to be able to use real-time information and make a difference.
I think that's where we should go next.
Yep. Oh, keep going.
Should I also talk about, like, there's a lot of other things we can do other than HVTs, like high value target.
Yeah,
rates.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm actually
right into
interested.
it. Let's go.
I'm actually interested in, and I was going to ask you. I'm interested in the more kinetic stuff, like
Okay.
where you think. Well, we know what a drug organization looks like in Mexico, right? It's labs, it's banks, it's boats, it's chemicals, it's this, that, the other thing.
Right.
How would you address all that?
So we're going to call that critical infrastructure, okay? And that's a classic special operations type mission, is to deny the enemy critical infrastructure. So they need water supplies, they need warehouses, they need communications, they need access to ports, weapons, lodging, just anything. One of the big things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be, if we haven't already, identifying critical infrastructure and doing raids to take out that critical infrastructure. That could be on, you know, when we were in Honduras and Panama and all of those operations down there, we'd always kind of go after like a radio station that was broadcasting propaganda and stuff like that. That's a
Podcast?
classic.
Did you go after any podcasts?
Yeah, well,
Columbus.
so now that we live in the digital world, it's not just radio
was
stations.
actually really good.
It's social media. It's you know, they do propaganda using Instagram and Facebook.
Yes, they do.
So, if we can
So you were talking
get
about
involved
those
in taking
60
that out.
people that support, you know, the funnel down of support that you get.
Right.
Are a lot of them like just monitoring social media
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and different things
Right.
around
I mean,
that?
and that's where it gets what we call purple. You know, purple meaning like joint operations. It's not just going to be the door kickers. It's going to be, you know, computer people and you know.
And when you're working those with all those people, are you involved in those meetings, or is it more of a like a?
You could be.
But you're obviously somebody involved with you is involved in those
Right.
daily meetings.
You could be. I mean, I think a lot of what an operator is going to be is intel meetings on who the targets are, whether it's a person or piece of critical infrastructure. But there's also going to be a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you don't see.
And I
that you
think
don't need to know
the
right now.
one thing as a DEA boss that I longed for was to have the ability of you guys in the event that one of our guys were kidnapped or hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
you
I
always
got-
talked about that.
I got
Always, when we were
calls
going
in the middle of the night,
Something
and
else
every
to put on
time
the
the
list
phone
is
rang,
QRF.
QRF, right?
Quick reaction force.
you got to go get
Yeah.
this guy because they're going to kill him.
Right.
Yeah.
That
And what
was-
is it? Explain what a quick reaction force does.
A team is operating in an area, and it doesn't matter which team it is. It's friendly people. There's almost always a unit that's just on standby, and they're ready to go in case somebody needs to be rescued.
How many
Essentially.
people are in a QFR? Is it?
Well, I mean, like I said, our
QRF.
basic QRF. Yep, our basic action element is the SEAL platoon, which is 15 guys. It might vary a little bit with the Army. You know, roughly about 15 guys, plus some support people. And
And then of that, is it everybody's qualified to do that? You're just on standby, kind of like you know.
I
you-
would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because-
It's a part of our mission
Right.
that we train for.
Because the more you're successful down there doing this, the more our people will be at risk.
Right.
And that's always made me sleep good at night thinking, okay,
Oh,
we
yeah.
got a problem. At least I'm not trying to wake Joe and Tommy up and, hey, let's go to the airport and try to get this guy.
Got a
Yeah,
problem
we're
in
not going to
Honduras.
make it. We're not going to make it. I think maybe those are all amazing assets of FTOs and what we can do kinetically. But I think the most important thing that when you designate an organization as an FTO, there's one giant motherfucker out there. You can't trade U.S. dollars. That's huge. Think about that. You cannot be associated with U.S. dollars, which is one of the reasons the Treasury Department is involved in this type of thing.
But that's one of the. That is a reaction if you were named a terrorist group.
You got it.
Right.
If you get caught trading dollars or trading any type of stuff, they take that away from you. Banks that support that, they can
Countries
seize the
that
banks,
support
countries
that.
that support that. Yeah, the dollar is the currency of the world. Well, you're denied that ability to command world trade.
So it's that trickle down effect of if named a terrorist group, the trickle down effect is tremendous.
It is unbelievable. And I think all these other things that we're talking about are ancillary to the number one thing, which is not only the money, but it's life and death. I mean, Joe's guys come down there, talk about cutting the head of the snake off repeatedly, time and time and time again. Can you imagine if you, I don't want to say killed, if you removed the CEO of Boeing every month? What would Boeing look like in 6
Probably
months?
better than they look now.
I knew that was
I
coming.
knew there was a joke in there
I
somewhere.
knew that was coming.
At least
I should have picked something
At least
else.
the doors wouldn't blow off.
So, Joe, one of the questions I got that just popped in my head is if you listen to the regular podcast, I hated writing reports. You guys have to write reports?
No reports.
You don't have to
the
write
after
reports?
action would be the closest thing to a report.
And again,
After
Should have been a
we do.
Navy
now
SEAL,
Now the
goddamn.
officers and command staff up the chain of command, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they have to write stuff up. They have to write their
Now,
after-action
if you guys
reports
run
and-
into, let's just say you're doing an operation similar to or with the cartels in Mexico, and you run across a house with a bunch of dope and money in it, you just call DEA and say there's a
Probably.
bunch of dope money in
Probably
here,
call our partners
and
in
then just walk away.
Yeah, I mean, there's, what
yeah,
do
they
they
don't
call
want
that?
the evidence.
Site exploitation teams. It would be probably no different from what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. Evidence exploitation teams.
By far, that's the best part about being the
run
Navy
into-
SEAL is that you don't write
yeah,
reports.
That's exactly.
All you got to do is make it
And
through
you get a
Navy
cool
SEAL
uniform.
training.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they give you that little benefit after almost 2 years of complete hell.
Right.
You know what? You don't have to write a report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know that
That's
the
why there's
whole
only a few thousand of them.
the whole
Right.
point of this, and we're busting balls here, but this is truly, as I look at this, getting them involved and getting this designation is the gift that keeps giving.
Well, we're just talking Joe with the Navy SEALs, but
I
if
mean-
like you said, you've worked with all these other Tier 1 agents or Tier 1 operation
Look
people,
at it
and
all
you get all of
comes.
them.
Yeah, I mean it, and I think it can't be downplayed what we could do with the treasure trove of information
No,
that these guys
absolutely.
would get. What could we do with the bum sitting on the corner here in St. Louis? We go kick his ass, and he's going to jail because we just found out his name was on a ledger that these guys ripped out of somebody's hand. So I'm telling you, it's the way to go.
Quick side.
I couldn't agree more, and I just want to end it on one thing with being involved in that just for a little bit of time. I think you look at, meaning me, when you guys are involved with us, like Syntalk and the government war on terror, you give us a different perspective. Sometimes we get focused on drugs, money. You say, who cares about the commodity? It's what they're doing.
It's the threat.
And who's doing it?
And it's the threat and who's doing it. So it opens up our minds as investigators and agents, and we get to look at it a different lens, but then also get some other skills and figure out different techniques to go after these guys. That's what I took away from it. Sitting across from not only, I don't want to call you guys Navy SEALs, but the commanders, lieutenant commanders, some admirals, some generals, and
Hey.
all of it from the bottom up, and hear that. And you're like, you're right.
Hey, Joe.
Right.
Do you think it's possible for a former agent that's slightly overweight in his mid-60s to make it into the Navy SEAL program?
It would be kind of tough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It would be tough for me.
You're talking about Cronin, huh?
That's right.
Oh, yeah. I'm only 58, so thanks a lot.
But I
That was a
think
great-
too is that if that were, and I said it a little bit earlier, I alluded to it, is how cool it would be for local law enforcement to be involved in, in St. Louis. You really don't have an effect on the border. You never think you do, right?
I think in 2024, every state is a border state.
Yep.
Right.
I think they made them that way.
Yeah.
They sure did.
That was their that was their cartel's business plan.
Some of the officers that you can get involved in this are extremely good investigators.
Oh, yeah.
And they can pitch right in, and the feeling that you would get is if you work one of them terrorists. And we always in DEA would, we're onto this cartel or we're into this thing or this thing. Then if if all of a sudden the terrorist group thing got linked to it,
Right.
it'd be a good feeling.
It might be a recruiting for being in local
Yeah.
law enforcement.
Absolutely.
You feel like you're part of something huge.
Imagine the guy working the beat that really knows there's guys
Right.
down there right now risking their life trying to make a difference on the beat he's in charge of. I mean,
Right.
it's great for morale. It's great for, I think, the public confidence in law enforcement. And it shows when we work together what we can accomplish. But we got to get these jerk-off politicians to sit down for a moment and understand. And I hope some of them watch this podcast because it'll open their eyes.
Right.
I told a story. I'm talking to a guy about the domestic cartel program. He stops me. He says, "Now, how do you guys have enough time to do that and check the meat?"
Right.
He
Said
thought
it
we were
last one.
USDA. I said, "Come on." So,
That story never gets old.
no.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jack, you got anything to add before we head
No,
out?
I just want to, give a shout out to you guys for doing this podcast. I think it's great, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't, really think and pray for our local law enforcement. Cause
We have a lot of fun, and
They're kicking ass, and you guys are doing a great job. Thanks.
and one of the things, Joe, too, is do you want to talk about some of the cases that we might be talking about coming up?
Yeah, I think what we're going to do is we're going to put some cool stuff on the table here. We're going to have guests like Joe. If not, Joe comes back with us. We'd love to have that. But Jack and I are we're working with a production company on something that looks pretty good. I think we're going to talk about. We've got 2 separate production companies that we're doing 2 separate projects, but I think one of them's really interesting, and it directly ties to just about everything we've been talking to on a much grander scale. And I think if we get the green light to talk about that, that might be one of our next.
And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to
Podcast.
we're going to focus more on local stuff. We're talked about the border for the first 2 episodes here, but there's so many great cases. And one of the things too is that we'll get some FBI people up here, some ATF people up there, and really talk about the damage they have caused in the St. Louis area. When I say damage, the people they lock up, and the way they attack and help law enforcement, local law enforcement, and really bring some of their cases to light, and the help they give, and the fun that is had, the great cases that are made, and that's what we want to bring and just
Yeah, I
memorialize
think
those.
one of the things you're going to like about some of the storylines that we have coming up is they start locally, maybe not locally here, but they start locally somewhere.
Right.
And they grow to this monumental Goliath of something.
54 kilos coming down the highway, or 53.
Yeah, and next thing you know, you've got a I got to be careful here a little bit. You've got some sort of cartel guy or some sort of leader or terrorist organization or something happening where it all comes back to where it started.
It really comes down to this, and I'm not bullshitting. I never worked on a case that the local police didn't start or help.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to have a federal agent come in and say, "Oh no, we do," no, bullshit. If it's not for the local police, we wouldn't be able to do our job. Guys like Joe wouldn't be able to do his job.
It's about the handoff, right?
It is. And it's about understanding what the threat is, and then realizing that one unit's not bigger than the other. We just gotta work it out.
I know one of the cases, and then we'll end on this, but one of the cases we're going to talk about, and I won't mention any of the names, but we actually were on a wire on a guy that was in prison. And remember Luis?
I do.
And he was in prison on phones, running dope deals.
Yeah.
It was actually,
And
it was fun.
But that's one of those things that's extremely unique because we start off with, and I don't remember exactly how that started, but we're going to talk about some BMF guys, right? Because
Absolutely.
there were some BMF guys.
St. Louis, where it all
Separate
started.
sources. There were some basketball players playing dice,
We're going to claim it all started here, and we got
well,
the proof.
I am an advocate, and Jack, after many lunches, Jack finally agrees with me that we're gonna set the BMF community on its ear in a good way and give a lot of props to St. Louis for the creation. St. Louis definitely had, and you can fact check this, they definitely had the Colombian connection. So maybe they got caught a
We're
little
going
too
to
soon.
let you know the story.
Hey, can you imagine if BMF and we had a terrorist-related organization in Mexico?
Oh my
And
goodness.
you grab the guy here, and we give Joe a call. Go whack the guy.
Oh my goodness.
Go
We
whack
gotta
the
be
guy.
whacking people.
Well, it's my.
Well, that's what they do,
How
right?
do you think we're getting stuff on TV, Tommy?
That's another reason they don't have to write
You got to
reports.
go whacking people.
Right.
Yeah, I think we got some good stuff coming up, Tommy. I like how you brought us on for the show, and we get to bring a different perspective to it.
Absolutely.
So you guys bring that.
The more the better.
The local show, and then we do a subsequent show that's got a little
We
bit
got
of
to
local
get Andrew
stuff.
Chambers
and-
on.
Yeah, I think
That-
that's
we
good.
would laugh.
Yes. Andrew Chambers is, just so Jack mentioned,
The
Andrew
highest
Chambers.
paid
is
informant.
highest paid informant in U.S. history.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah,
He came through here a couple times. He
Yeah,
would,
he did.
when he would come through town, he was just a pro. So he would start he wouldn't come to you and just let you know, I'm going to try to do something. He would go out and do it and then come to you and go, hey, this is what I got. And this is what I'm doing.
I'll cut you in, and I'm out.
And a lot of people, I remember Bottini, who we talk about, who's been on the show before, he came in town, stirred something up, and then he was telling Bottini what paperwork to fill out.
Yeah.
That's how.
He had to get paid through teletype, so he did
Right.
something somewhere else and was getting paid.
He called me last week. He said, "Hey, Jack." I said, "Yeah, Andrew, what's going on?" He goes, how about the 150 grand you guys shorted me? I said, I'm off the job. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, I think you're going to be surprised because we talked about this the other day. There's some stuff that started in like Miami with an old friend of ours, Brian, who we won't say his last name, that led to the downfall of a prince in a foreign country,
Yep.
and some daughters of Venezuelan elite and all kinds of fun stuff.
Unholy alliance you always talk about.
It's the unholy alliance, but it starts with a traffic stop, or it starts with two friends picking up the phone, and next thing you know, you're in Curacao, or you're in Lebanon, or you're setting up a meeting in
Or North St.
Cyprus,
Louis.
or North St. Louis.
Yeah.
Or it all comes back anyway,
Right, right.
It all comes back, and that's why I think this is fun, and people like to hear about it because they get to hear both sides.
And Joe, thanks for coming on. I could talk about the Navy SEALs all day long.
I could too.
Well, we can do it again.
We
We'll
next
do it
time.
again. That's what I'm saying. We'll do it again.
Next time Joe comes on, we got to talk about this burpee thing.
Actually, I want him to come on the other podcast so we can
Well, you got to ask
have
him
a lot.
about the burpees.
Yep. All right.
There was quite a few burpees and rolling in the sand for infraction.
Because he
That-
is
Yeah.
part of the proud member of the St. Louis Police Department,
I am.
which obviously is
Second generation.
and your father was a wonderful man.
That's
There is
right.
a wonderful man.
Thank you. I
And,
appreciate
we were talking before, and John and I worked with his father Al, and he was always the sense of reason, and that hung around all kinds of knuckleheads. But he was never the knucklehead. He was always the guy.
Well, I need to hear some of those stories because some of them are going to be stories that I haven't heard before. So.
Okay. All right, boys. That's episode 2. Thank you. We'll see you at episode 3. We'll talk about some local stuff.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thank you.
Cheers.